Welcome to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. For all of the 20th century, the prime industry in British Columbia was logging. And for most of that century, logging was done by dozens of small operators in really family-based businesses. These were the people that supplied the timber needs of a growing population for homes, for the railway business, for mining, irrigation, fruit industry. Today, we meet a logger and find out about the process of making a living out of the forests. Gerald Rabeau and the Okanagan Logger on Pioneers and Places. Welcome to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts, and our storyteller today is Gerald Rabeau, 52 years in the forest business. And Gerald, I guess for you it started when you were just a kid.
That's correct. My first start was in the wood business when my father went to the Second World War. And we were living out in the country with my mother and two brothers, and we were faced with supplying the household wood. So at 12 years old, we took Dad's crosscut saw that he had left behind and went out in the woods and started felling trees and cutting up into wood. And
at 12? You're 12 years old now?
12 years old, right.
And you were the foreman of this corporation. Your brothers were about how old?
My brothers were 10 and 7. And
What did your mother say as you headed out the door each morning?
Well, she didn't say too much, but she certainly thought an awful lot and made the regular routine when we came back home and counted all the fingers and toes to see they're all still there, because she could hear the trees crashing in the background, and obviously was very concerned that we were looking after ourselves properly. But we all survived.
Well, you all survived, so sure. As a 12-year-old, this must have said to you, I'm doing a man's work here. Did you sense that?
Yes, we did. We all three of us sensed that we were doing a man's work, and we were very proud to be doing it and keeping the house fires going.
Because you're cutting trees, and once you get out there, you're cutting them up into fire lengths, and there's a bunch of horse work involved here too, isn't there?
Yes. Fortunately, the horse that we had was 25 years old, and he knew a lot more about logging than we did. So he kind of took care of us rather than we take care of him. so it was a very interesting experience with the old horse.
Yeah.
Right.
Your dad got back from the Second World War. You were 15 years old then, and that's when you and he began working in the bush together.
That's right. We went back into the woods. Obviously, I was still going to high school, so we did it I worked on weekends and nights and things like this, and Dad worked during the week. So my two brothers and I would head out in the woods on Saturday and do some logging when he wasn't around.
Yeah,
so,
and
right.
To keep the home fires burning some more, make a little extra revenue.
That's correct.
This was a pretty common story, it strikes me, up and down the valley, because there were a lot of family logging operations and small operations everywhere.
Correct. Almost everyone in that time, going back to the 1940s, early 40s, depended a whole lot on the wood industry to develop their farms, develop their ranches, whatever. So it was not perhaps a full-time job for a lot of people, but certainly a very, very worthwhile and very needed part-time job.
So it would be logging in the fall and winter and farming in the spring and summer.
That's about the pattern, right, for most people.
Now, how did it evolve? What was the process of evolution here as this business got underway?
Well, as far as the business got underway in the Okanagan Valley, started primarily at the turn of the century when the area became populated. And because of population, they created a need. There was a need for housing, they needed for shelter. So obviously some people realized the need and started up small mills to supply this need. And obviously the population expanded and other things were created, like the mining industry. The mining industry in the area started around the turn of the century. That industry needed timbers and props and whatever, and housing obviously for the mining camps. So again, the lumber industry was able to increase again. And as the industries developed, the railroads very obviously got interested in the area and started developing the railroad infrastructure. That created another big boom for the wood business. And just to give you an example, for 1 mile of railroad, that consumed enough wood to build about 18 houses, which was a considerable amount of wood.
So for that section, I guess in the 30s, the section between Vernon and Kelowna was finished, 35 miles, quite a few houses in there.
Probably about 600 houses, which, you know, if you look at today's standards for 600 housing starts in Vernon and Kelowna, is a boom on an annual basis.
And when you take a look at this, this photograph of ties stacked in the bush, like a high-rise high. I mean, this is a huge process, getting these ties cut.
It certainly was, and when you imagine going back to when some of the early railroads started here very early, those ties were made by broad axe and by hand labor. They were not sawn. The sawn ties did not come till later, and they were hacked and hewed out in the woods by people doing hand work. It was a tremendous industry.
And then hand stacked and then transported from there into town somewhere.
That's correct. And there are many different ways of transportation. Some by sleigh haul, and some by river, floated down the river, and some put in booms, come down the lakes and things like that. There are many different forms of transportation. It's a great industry, big industry.
Take a break here, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about the evolution of the business of logging with Gerald Ribot. Don't go away. Welcome back to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Gerald Ribot. He's telling us the story of the evolution of the logging industry. I think I cut you off at the railway business and after mining, but there was, of course, the fruit industry, which had a whole different requirement.
That's correct, and it required a different type of wood, primarily knot free for the fruit boxes. It was very important that the fruit boxes in those days, when we had loose packed apples, that there were no defects in the no knot holes and things like this to bruise the apples. So,
matter of fact, when you were looking at our fruit boxes, you say those aren't actual, required fruit boxes. What would the fruit boxes required to be in those days?
They had to have solid sides.
No edges.
No edges for the fruit to be damaged or bruised. So that required the large trees, the large yellow pine that we had growing on the side hills and the open dry side hills. And there were many plants that specialized in that type of wood. Armstrong Sawmills, S.M. Simpson, Pondosa Pine, Vernon Box, they all specialized in those type of wood and that type of product. And many of those plants had their own box factories associated with the sawmill to supply the food industry.
Well, Gorman Brothers, for example, started making fruit box.
That's correct.
Wood.
That's right. They made the larger bins as demands changed in the food industry. They started making some of the large bins also.
Now, when I look at pictures of the logging industry, I see horses with huge loads of logs behind them, and I'm thinking to myself, how is this possible? Is this a photo they took just to pull one over on the city slicker who doesn't know what's going on? What's the process of getting lumber down out of the bush?
Those huge loads that you saw there in some of the old pictures, they are real. They're not put on. They're not something that somebody's dreamt up. They are actual pictures of actual loads of logs, primarily on sleighs. Now, the route usually to a river or to a lake or whatever was generally on a downhill slope. So really the horses were doing the steering. They weren't pulling those loads. They were just too big for them to pull. So it was a downhill slope, And in places where the steeping was too great to control, there'd be things like sanding to slow it down, or perhaps a cable tied to the load and snubbed down the hill. So the horses were primarily steering the sleigh, and then they used the horses to pull the sleigh back up for the load. So,
Exactly. And when we take a look at for example, this photograph at the mill, how many different teams of horses are there? It looks like about 20 teams of horses hauling stuff. It was you had to be a horseman as well as a logger to get the job
That's
done.
correct. Well, there were many processes in the yard. First of all, we required horses to store the logs for when the transportation wasn't available. Snow melted, so there was no more transportation available. So you had to have horses to store the logs in huge piles. Then you had to have a horses to take the piles back down and load them perhaps on a cart or whatever, and then transport them to the head of the sawmill and unload them to go into the sawmill. Then at the back end of the mill, you would have another cart that probably all the slabs and edgings and things went into. And that had to be transported to the power boiler to create steam, because all our mills were powered by steam in those days, or generally were powered by steam. Then if we get back to your fruit boxes, Mike, that lumber had to be taken back out into the yard and dry piled to take the moisture out of it, because fruit box lumber has to be dry. It can't be green.
Be nice and light, because they're selling this, they're
That's right.
transporting this apple by
That's
the pound.
right.
You didn't want heavyweight boxes.
That's correct. And so, and then the horses were used to take them to the planing mill or whatever for the process that was just processing the regular lumber, the lower grade lumber. So the horses were an extremely important part of the process.
And of course, people who knew how to handle the horses. I mean, you needed to have farriers, you needed to have quick tack people, you needed all of these people involved in the logging business.
That's correct. They're a very, very important part of the business, and you also picked your people very, very carefully on who these teamsters would be, because there's a very big investment in a horse in those days also. Because
Yeah, you didn't want a load running over them or anything.
No, the horses had to be trained, and obviously there was a demand. So as long as there's demand, there's a price. So there's a big investment in horses.
Now, and whenever as a person outside the logging business, I think to myself, well, logging is logging, but you've already said that you needed one kind of trees for the boxes, you need another kind of lumber for dimension lumber, and you need another kind of lumber for poles. I mean, all of these different things are being cut out of the forest.
That's correct. That's correct. And different people and different companies specialize in different things. Some people specialize perhaps in the fruit industry, and perhaps in paneling and whatever, decorative products. All came from about the same type of tree. A lot of people were quite satisfied just to supply the house building industry or the commercial industry. Quite satisfied to do that. Some people specialized in the railroad business. The railroads not only required ties, but they required lumber to build boxcars. In those days, you must remember, we had wooden boxcars. We didn't have metal boxcars. You needed floors, you needed walls, you needed ceilings.
Trestles, things shoring for tunnels.
That's right. Little things that we forget about now. Grain in those days was hauled in boxcars. So you had to build doors that fit across the regular doors that we have now. But they had to be what we called grain tight, because you didn't want a stream of grain from Winnipeg to Vancouver, falling through a knothole. So
quality lumber was essential. And the irrigation business, we did a story about irrigation on this, and each one of those required crib dams that required logging companies attached right to them to get the thing working.
And the flumes.
And the flumes.
And the flumes. Yeah.
So everybody must have been in the logging business in those days, with the exception of maybe a couple of mercantile guys.
Well, of course, there was a lot of spin-off jobs, obviously. Mercantile people and people looking after the horses and people building harnesses, whatever. There were a lot of spin-off jobs, obviously. And the support industry within the logging camp, you had to have cooks, and probably if the camp got larger, you had to have a janitor. And in some camps you hired a saw filer, so you paid somebody to file your saw for you. So there was a big spin-off industry, even within the camps.
And you knew all of these guys throughout the valley. You must have encountered them along the way.
Well, yes, and they all, obviously, as in any industry, they had a reputation for either being good or being bad, and that followed them. And even without the modern conveniences of communication, the word got around very quickly. So.
Because, I mean, loggers are, I mean, there used to be a cartoon called, what was it called, Orangutans.
Right.
I mean, it was like a pretty rough kind of job. Did you sense that, or is that a reputation that's not warranted?
I don't. It's not a reputation generally warranted. I think there's some of the glamorizing almost any industry or any mode of life. People that worked in the woods are very serious people. They depended on their livelihood, and many of them depended on working in the woods during the winter because they were building a farm or they're expanding a ranch or whatever. Maybe they were trying to build a new home, whatever. It was a very serious business. There was not that much fooling around. So.
I mean, axe throwing and the various logging sports. I mean, did actual loggers actually participate in those things?
Yes, they did. But that was fun things. Those are fun things. Those kind of competition go to this day. It was just a fun type of thing, relaxing. It is non-productive, of course.
We've got a whole lot of tools around me here today, and I want to take a look at them because these are the tools of the trade, and if you're not from a logging family, you may not have any idea. So we're going to take a look at the tools of the trade right after we come back from this break. Welcome back to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Gerald Rabot talking about the history of logging. Who was responsible for the tools that a guy used when he was out in the bush?
We had two different types of workers out in the woods in those days. We had the people that worked by the hour or by the day. Then we had piece workers. And the piece workers supplied their own tools. They supplied and looked after their own tools. The people that worked by the hour or by the day, generally the tools were supplied to them.
This axe we see here that's got that wire wrapped around it, what kind of an axe is that?
That is an axe that used for peeling cedar poles. And the wire that you see wrapped around the handle there is to protect the handle from getting damaged by the knots and the limbs of the trees.
And at $1.50 a handle, a man didn't want to lose handles and lose wages.
Well, not when you're looking at wages in those days, about $3.20 a day, and the handle's worth something like $1.15. Took a big portion of your day, so you didn't want to break a handle.
The broad axes and double-bitted axes. Cork boots, I remember cork boots from the coast. You had cork boots in the interior as well?
Oh, yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
And they were a big, pricey item.
Yes, and the $3.20 that I was talking about, that was a range of wages paid in 1937. And those boots were worth $15 at that time. So it took almost a week's work to buy a pair of boots.
That was a week without other expenses. So it was a thing you didn't want to have to do more than once a year. Would a pair of boots last a year, or?
Yes, they would. They would last more than a year if you looked after them. If you looked after them and oiled them, kept them repaired, they'd last more than a year. Oh, yes.
I asked you if you were buying Pierre Paris boots or Dayton's.
Well, those are my last pair of boots that I bought, and as you know, Mike, Pierre Paris was the king of the boot industry for logging boots, and they decided at that time to raise their prices substantially. So another boot company like Lecky or Dayton came in, and those are not Paris. They're the cheaper model.
There, you are a connoisseur of logging equipment when you can tell the difference. We have other tools there, long-handled things with hooks on the end, PVs, and that's a spud. This is actually a spud here. What was the function of a spud?
The spud, that was for peeling thick bark wood, like fir used for piling and other things like that. the spud was used for taking the bark off those kind of trees.
And a PV, I mean,
That was for-
somebody had to
that-
roll logs over.
That was for turning the logs over so you could take the bark off on all sides, you know,
Yeah.
things like that.
Some other tools of the trade. This, I guess, is more of a modern era wedge. It's made out of what? Manganese, magnesium?
That's correct.
Now, if you weren't going to have a lot of money, you might as well make your own wedges. Look at these little beauties.
That's made out of some stunted cedar, very slow growth, and they were very effective. They work just as well as the metal ones. And
Yeah, all
certainly a
you
lot
needed
cheaper.
was an edge, didn't you, to tip the
correct.
tree in the right direction?
That's correct.
And
That's
you
correct.
could make endless numbers of those during your lunch break.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So a pretty organic stuff. This looks pretty organic too. I mean, where would you use a hardwood mallet?
That's for, in the process of splitting cedar shakes to beat the froe down through the block and
So you've got
split off.
got kind of one that you're not real proud of here, Gerald. But this is sort of a homemade, handmade
That's
version.
correct. Probably somebody in some logging camp somewhere and decided they needed to make some shakes and built a machine for it. That's not your regular froe.
You're not proud of that fro, but
No.
if you made good cedar shakes, one end of the shake would be thick,
Right.
and one end would be thin, and that thin end would go up underneath the others.
That's correct.
And you'd end up with a pretty good operation.
Right.
What is this mallet?
That is a marking hammer that identifies where a particular tree or a particular log came from as far as the specific piece of land that it came from. You could identify the landowner, you could identify the piece of land.
That would just be
That's-
stamped in the
that's
end of the
correct.
wood.
That's correct.
And these would be registered with the Ministry of Forests, so
That's
you
correct.
knew where the logs
That's
were.
right. And there is a registry right here.
And it's got all the stamp hammers
Yes, it
ever
has.
in it.
Yes, it has.
Who were the people that rose to prominence? Who were the big players finally in the logging business in the Okanagan?
Yes, consolidation started obviously a long time ago in the Okanagan. The Lear family in Penticton grew to prominence. The Simpson family in Kelowna grew to prominence. The Smith family, which started in 1895 in Armstrong, and Vernon, Box, and Pine near Vernon, and then the Hanbury family at Monty Lake.
And the Rabeaus rose to prominence. Riverside Sawmills, you are now the chief operating officer of Riverside Sawmills.
That's correct.
52 years in the business?
That's correct.
And are you, I mean, obviously enjoying it? Do you look back on it with a sense of pride?
Certainly do. Certainly do.
Because you're one of the largest existing homegrown companies still going, aren't you?
Yes, we are.
Can you put it in any kind of quantitative terms?
I really can't. No, I'm very proud to be where we are.
In Armstrong and Kelowna and where else for Riverside?
In the Caribou.
Yeah? Thank you very much for telling us the story of, some of the story of logging in the Okanagan. There's lots more to tell and more characters, and maybe we can get Gerald back to tell those stories next time. Thanks for watching Okanagan Pioneers and Places.